Hello, you're listening to the Shetland Times podcast. I'm your host, Marjolein Robertson, and today I'm joined by Frank Robertson, also known as my dad. Hi, Frank.
Hello, Marjolein.
For the purposes of this podcast, I'll call him Frank, so it's easier for those to remember who he is. Just to give everyone an introduction to yourself, can you give a quick summary of who you are and what you have done?
Well, I was born here in the Shetland. I went to school in Lerwick, Anderson Educational Institute. I went on to the Edinburgh College of Art. I studied architecture. I worked for a few years in Edinburgh, and then I came back to Shetland. And in 1975, I became the chief architect for Shetland. Worked during the oil days and all the big developments that took place in Shetland. And then I took early retirement in 1997.
But you didn't retire, did you?
I managed to retire for a year and a half.
Oh, okay.
Before the folk persuaded me that I should become a councillor.
And then you were a councillor for 4 terms?
And then I was a councillor for 17 years.
Is that 4 terms?
It was something like that.
One of those would have been 5
Yeah,
terms.
one of those was 5,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now you're retired.
And now I am at last retired from political life.
Yeah, okay. Still working on the croft?
And got back to working on the croft, yes.
Yes, well you
Full
never really
circle.
stopped
Yes,
working
yes.
on the croft though.
Yes, back to the croft again, yeah.
Why I really like speaking to you, not just because you're my dad, I really like speaking to you because I think you've lived a very interesting life, and I ken a lot of folk have done this, but less and less so, is that you lived in Shetland and you grew up in an almost unchanged world. Like the world you first grew up in, although you're born after the First World War and in the turmoil of the Second World War, like actual day-to-day life in Shetland had been relatively unchanged for a long time. And then you moved away to university, came home again, and it must have been so different.
Well, when I was brought up in the croft here, we made all our living off the piece of land that we have here and the croft we had here, completely. Except my father did go to sea. He spent all his young days at sea. He was in the First World War and the Second World War. But basically, our income was off the land. And so you got what was called an extreme work ethic, because you had to get up and get out and work every hour of the day like it is.
And that income, would that have mostly been from Mackin, or?
No, we had 12 kye, we had sheep, and we cultivated the whole place with corn and tatties and neeps.
Where did you sell it at?
The kye was sold at Roop's at the Brigawaz, or shipped off. The lambs were shipped off at that time to various different buyers. Yeah.
Oh.
And the wool was quite valuable at that time. Got a good price for wool, as they say. And to give you an idea how hard we worked, I mind one summer day we worked in the hay. We started off at early morning, maybe about 8 o'clock we were out, and we're raking it all by hand. It's cut by hand, raked by hand. And I come home here for the Vauxhall, we had crofts at the Vauxhall. I come home here at 10 o'clock at night, and I met my mother holding on to a young strick.
What's a strick?
A young cow.
Oh, I never saw the strick.
And she was holding on to the strick, and the strick was jumping up and down. And she says, "This strick is seeking the bull." And she says, "Dul had to go weir to twat." 10 o'clock at night, summer night. I got a cup of tea, and I set out at 10 o'clock to go to walk the twat. That's 5 miles from Shellyville to twat. And going down the Grooting Road about 11 o'clock at night, there were no cars there, very little traffic. It was a summer night. The strick began to run, and we ran the whole way along the Grooting Road. She was trotting.
That's like 2 miles.
About 2 miles. She ran the whole way until her feet came sore and she came breathless. And then I walked by Park Hall, and then I came to the Fitteratuna Garden, and they told me about a shortcut up to the tunes there. But what I didn't ken is there was a bug there, and I landed this cow in a bug right up their middle, and I had an awful job pulling her out of the bug. And eventually I got her up to the Nicholson's farm at Twat. And by this time it was midnight. And of course there was nobody about, and I started hammering on the door.
How old were you?
I was 16.
Oh, okay. Still.
I started hammering on the door, and eventually Robbie Nicholson came out and asked and said what was I wanting, and of course he saw the coup, and he took me around to the bull and slipped the bull, and the bull did his job on the coup, and then I turned and started walking back. By this time it was coming out at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And by this time the feet was sore on the hard road. I took a different route down. I got down the Bray of Bixter, and I walked all along the road along there. Eventually I got up to the road, and somewhere about 2 o'clock in the morning I was coming along by Sefster when I met my father out looking for me.
What did he know? And
he kent where I was going, and he taken a push bike with him, and he took charge of the strick, and he gave me the push bike, and I cycled home on the push bike, and he come home sometime 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, late in the strick. And that's the kind of life you had to live, and that's the kind of things you had to do if you had to survive in a croft.
Just a question. Why did you have to take the strick all the way to Twat, which is, as you said, 5 miles away?
5 miles. Well, there was a Shetland bull in Murister, but the folk particularly wanted the Twat, the Nicholsons at Twat, keep it black poles, and they were bigger, heavier animals, and they were wanting a black pole calf because that sold better.
Okay, and that's what the strick
and
was.
that's why I was going all the way to Twat.
So, were there other bulls around? They just weren't Shetland bulls?
No, there was no other bulls except for Murister and Twat. There had been bulls in Wise, but that was even farther to go.
That Wise was only 4 miles away.
It's not, it's 5 miles from here.
Really?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. I've been quoting things wrong my entire life.
Yeah.
Wow. So she must have been some size actually, because when you first said strick and said it was a young
it was probably she was probably a year old.
So is a strick like the coup equivalent of a gimmer?
Yeah.
A gimmer, for anybody who doesn't know, is a year-old sheep.
That's right.
And
should have been maybe 18 months, this one.
It's kind of like equivalent to a teenager.
Yeah. Lovely, she was red and white, beautiful looking strick. Yeah.
That's so
And she was Shetland with big horns.
Oh, so she had horns.
Yeah.
That's an amazing story.
And so that's what you had to do when you're living on the croft. And the following day, of course, even though I only got the bed about between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, the following day we had to be back up again at 8 o'clock and back out getting the hay home.
Makes me feel really lazy.
Yeah.
So was there a difference then in the long summer days and then in what you did at winter time?
Well, my memory of, this is back in the 50s, and my memory is very hard, cold, snowy winters.
Yeah.
Year after year, heavy snows. And I mind better summers. I do mind better drier summers. And I particularly mind far better drier vors. When we would be plowing down here, and my job was to go and harrow with the tractor. And I mind harrowing, and I was blended with stour.
Because it's so dusty.
Because it's so dry.
Wow.
No, this last few years it's been just gutter.
Oh, the last 3 years have been shocking.
Yeah.
For how it's been.
So that was my life on the croft.
So, but in winter, the reason I'm asking this is because I hear folk in Fulla hibernate, and I wondered if it was more, and I know that's like a stereotype for Fulla folk that they don't get up.
Yeah.
I'm not meaning to push that. But it makes sense in this way of life that in winter, if there's less to do, you'd have stayed in bed more and rested more. Did that happen?
Well, if you lived on a croft, the absolute first priority was the animals.
Yeah.
No matter what happened, if you didn't eat, you had to go out and feed the animals, look after the animals, get corn into the animals, hay into the animals. We would have maybe 50 lambs in a lammy house. They all had to be fed twice a day. That was absolute priority.
Yeah.
The animals.
So when would you go out in the morning? Did you?
Maybe about 9 o'clock in the winter.
Okay, so not really early.
Yeah, I know.
Still when it starts to get light.
But I was at the Lerby School, mind.
So there had been a big change as well, because then you went to Edinburgh in about 1959.
I got to Edinburgh in the 1st of October 1957.
Of course, because you first did...
I did a year's teaching.
Yes, and then you studied architecture for 7 years.
I studied architecture for 7 years.
And then you worked?
And then I worked for 7 years. So I was with the Shetland 14 years.
Slightly more?
Yeah, slightly more, yeah.
So what was it like coming back to Salivo?
Well, career guidance when I left the Anderson Institute was, boy, the best you can do is going south to college or university, get a qualification, and by the way.
That's so sad.
There's nothing here for you.
Yeah.
And it was sad. And I just accepted that fact that I might never work in Shetland in my life. I come back here principally because my father had died suddenly. He died. My mother was on her own, still had animals, kye and sheep and everything else. And I come home for a spell to help her out.
Yeah.
What the change that had occurred here then was all the old folk that I knew had died. There was hardly any young folk working crofts or doing anything around here. And the place had kind of, you might say, lost its heart.
Yeah.
And there wasn't the same intensive cultivation that went on when I was a boy. Most of the land was being laid down to sheep, but at the same time, crofters were starting a portion in the scattle, taking in the scattle. They were taking in each of their shares, maybe 100 acre or 50 acre at a time, and reseeding that. So they were getting slightly better quality land and be able to get better stock on it. What I found out when I came back here was I sort of was in a bit of a time warp, because I was still thinking of Shetland is when I'd left in 1957.
Yeah.
And I came back in 72, and I was still thinking as though the place was the same. It wasn't. It had changed.
That would have been a shock.
It was a shock, yeah. And all the folk all the ancient I'd been at the school with, they'd all left. Hardly any of them were in Shetland anymore. Just a handful of them as teachers were still here, but that was all.
Did you not come home in the summers, or did you only do that when you were studying?
I come home in the summer. I managed to come home in the summer maybe for about 3 weeks each summer, and maybe 4 weeks.
That's so funny, because when I was at university, I'd come home for about 3 months.
Yeah. But see, one of the summers, that was the summer of 1960. I actually didn't come home here. I signed on to a trawler and I went and fished around Faroe for a whole summer.
How did you get them to let you sign on to the trawler, Dad? This is a good story.
Well, I got down to Granton, and I mean I'd been at the fishing with the back of Vela and the back of Culswick all my life. I had been 8 years old.
Yeah. And
I could gut fish and handle lines and tie knots and do anything about with boats. And I heard that there was good money in the trawlers. And I heard that there was a skipper on one of the trawlers, the Barbara Peyton, and he was a Yell man, called Bob Tate. And I got done when the trawlers came in and asked him if there were any place on the trawler. And he said, yes. He said, we're looking for a deckhand greaser. He says, can do work nets, can do gut fish. I says, yes, I can do all that. And I said, fair enough. He says, come down the morning, and he says, we'll get you to sign the papers. And come on. So, I mean, this is me, a student with the Edinburgh College of Art. So I got done the following day, and I got into the office, the shipping office of the Peyton line to sign on, and gave my name and said I came from Shetland. And then they said, well, we'll have to get the name of your last fishing boat that you were on. And I thought to myself, and he says, can you give me the name of the last fishing boat? And the first thing that came to my mind was the boat that they were using in the Lerwick Harbour as a pilot boat called the Bud and Rose. So I said, oh, the last boat I was on was the Bud and Rose. And I could even mind the number, 479 or whatever it was.
LK 479.
Yes, and I gave the number. And I mind this clerk, write that down. That's fair enough.
So lucky they didn't have the internet.
Yeah.
Wow, and then that got you on the boat.
So that got me for 3 months up to Faroe.
Did you actually land in Faroe?
We landed twice.
Wow.
Yeah, we landed twice. But we were out for, each trip was 14 days, and we never took our clothes off for 14 days.
Wow.
And we fished continuously. You were 4 hours on, 4 hours off. And you tried to sleep in that 4 hours. You had to have your mitt in that 4 hours, sleep in that 4 hours, and then the bell would go and you were back on deck in the fish ponds hauling the trawl in.
Shh,
and that went on for 14 days.
That's amazing.
Never stopped. And they're absolutely, when you were on the grunts fishing, you never stopped.
Yeah.
They pushed you hard. They really pushed you hard. And the boxes were coming in. You were gutting, and we only stopped fishing when we ran out of ice.
Yeah.
When the hold was absolutely full, but the fish was not as fresh as what we get now, because we were coming back and landing fish that was nearly 2 weeks old in Granton.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we unloaded,
I never bought fish when I was in Edinburgh. I only buy it here.
As soon as we unloaded the fish, we got 1 day or maybe 2 days ashore in Leith, back on the boat and back to Faroe again.
How long did you do that for?
I did it for 3 months.
3 months. Wow.
Yeah.
That would have been really good though. Good
I
money.
just loved it. I absolutely loved it. And at that time, I was kind of getting despondent with the art college and the kind of airy-fairy place it was. And I just sweated to be actually going to the sea permanently.
Really?
I did.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought about it.
Mind when I wanted to go to the Merchant Navy.
Because my whole family had all been at sea. My father had been at sea all his life, and all my uncles had been at sea. My uncle Robbie was the captain. He was the dock master, Albert Edward, in Newcastle. That was the digression.
That was a digression.
About my student life.
If we were on to another story.
Yeah.
We were speaking about the fact that when you came home it was changed.
It was changed, yeah. And I didn't intend to stay home.
Oh, yeah, this is where
I didn't intend to stay home. I was just staying home long enough to kind of fix up the house for my mother, clear up things. And then I had a flat in Edinburgh. I had a good job in Edinburgh. I was working for Professor Sir Robert Matthew. And he was keeping my job open. One of the biggest practices in Edinburgh. And I had become a kind of a more of a city man as a countryman.
I can't imagine you like that.
Yes.
It's so funny.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but you ended up staying home.
I ended up staying longer because I started sailing, and I just absolutely loved sailing, which I'd always wanted to do all my young days, but I'd never had a chance. And I started sailing with Andrew Tate and the Bluebell. And I just absolutely loved it. And I ended up staying, instead of staying 1 year, I ended up staying 3 years.
If I could have done that with surfing in New Zealand,
yeah.
I would have done that.
Yes.
I see what you mean. So that because it's so different nowadays. Because nowadays, yes, folk go to university and some folk don't come back. But I think there must be such a giant percentage coming home compared to what happened in your day.
I know. I was kind of reliving my boyhood. I was in my 30s and reliving my boyhood again.
Oh, I think it's sailing.
That's what I was doing, sailing, yeah.
Yeah.
But always at the back of my mind, I was going to go back to Edinburgh. And then, you know what happened? Oil came over the horizon.
Okay, they're going to say ma'am, but no, not yet.
Oil came over the horizon.
Well, when did the oil come in? I should know this. 76?
I got inklings. I got inklings in 1974. that there was large oil fields being discovered to the east of Shetland. But it didn't register through me at the time. And then I actually had got persuaded to become what was called a district councillor in 1973. And so I was a district councillor in Sandsty and Esty in 1973. And I had the great good fortune to meet up with a giant of a man. That was A.I. Tulloch.
Yes.
Who was the man responsible for getting Shetland where it is with the oil companies.
If it hadn't been for him, we would be nowhere near as affluent as
If it hadn't been for him, we would have had oil bases sprouting up all around Shetland.
Not just one uniformed area,
No,
and
not
we
one
wouldn't be
uniformed
getting.
area.
We wouldn't have had our fund.
No, and we wouldn't have had oil funds.
We'll need to have a whole episode about that.
We'll have
man,
a whole episode about that man, yes.
because it's a remarkable story that needs to be remembered.
It is, needs to be remembered. People just not realise what they owe. People like A.I. Tulloch, Dodie Woolley and Alec Morrison, giants of men who were willing to take the oil industry on and had no fear for them.
And I think the oil industry came here thinking that the Shetlanders would never kick up any fuss.
That's exactly
they thought
right.
They probably could just walk right over
Just
us.
walk over us, yeah.
Naive islanders.
Just offer the crofters and the lairds some sweetie money,
Yeah.
and then get the land, and once they'd got title to the land, do with it what they wanted. And the change that occurred once oil came here, the change that occurred from 1975 to about 1980 were dramatic.
Yeah. That would be a whole other episode
Shetland
of this.
changed beyond all recognition.
So, thanks for speaking to us today about different anecdotes from crofting and about your life in general. It's been really interesting. I've learnt whole new stories I didn't know before.
Yes, well, thank you, Marjolein, for interviewing me, and I hope you enjoyed it. There's a lot more stories you didn't come for.
Yeah, there are more. In fact, while we were recording this, we had to cut a few out because there was too many good stories. But thank you, and thank you for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it. And also, if you've any recommendations of any people you'd like to hear interviewed on the podcast, or different kind of genres or things to speak about, whether it's sport or art or history or anything you've got an idea about, please message us and let us know. Thank you for listening. This is the Shetland Times podcast. I'm Marjolein Robertson, and I've been speaking with Frank Robertson, my dad.